one thing. We'll start there. Let
Okay.
me share the page, and the link will be there. Second. Okay, that should be the correct link right there.
And you emailed that to me?
You want me to email it?
Or did you just modify it in the document?
I modified it in the document.
All right, I'll just go to that. That's fine. What?
This is a clip that talks about and gives you a feel for how plants actually absorb nutrients from the soil.
Introducing plant uptake of nutrients, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Not all soils are created equal.
It's the same thing.
Chemistry, we wouldn't be able to.
No.
It's the same thing.
All right. Damn.
Was that the old one?
Yeah. Let's see. Maybe I just copied it into this folder. Could you email it to me? We'll do it that way.
Yep. Yep. Okay, it's sent.
Okay. Did you send that to my Gmail?
I sent it to both of them, MUM and Gmail, I think.
Bouncing off satellites here. Well, how about this? I can keep an eye out for that email. Would you want to start talking or start lecturing by chance?
Sure. Can you see the link on my shared page?
Hold on a second. I'm gonna make this I can see your view, trying to put it up on the TV here. Hold on. There. Okay, we can see your shared view on the screen. Oh, here, your link just came through. There we go. Right on time.
Okay.
Okay.
Yellow soybeans are not healthy soybeans. Why? Because soybeans turn yellow when they lack a critical mineral, iron. Plants require a balance of minerals for healthy growth. Without the proper balance of minerals, the plant will not grow normally and eventually crop yields will decrease. This in turn affects humans because a substandard food crop will be less nutritious. Minerals, such as iron, come from the soil. Depending on soil conditions, mainly pH, the mineral can be bound to a soil particle or soluble in the soil. This animation will focus on the reactions required to free a mineral from the soil, which makes the mineral soluble and available for uptake by the plant. In this example, we will follow the mineral iron as it makes its way into a soybean plant. To grow properly, plants extract iron from the soil. For this process to be successful, iron must be available in a soluble form. It cannot be absorbed by the plant without first being made soluble. But under certain conditions, such as high pH, most of the iron is bound to soil particles, and only a small amount is soluble and available to the plant. To make more iron available, the soil conditions must change, especially near the root surface. Here we see iron bound to soil particles. Unless this iron is released from the particles, the plant will exhibit iron deficiency stress. Soybeans are sensitive to low iron levels, which causes the plants to exhibit yellow leaves. This yellowing of the young leaves slows plant growth and reduces yield. Because of its chemical properties, iron is bound to soil particles when the soil pH is too high. The mineral remains bound until the pH is lowered. How can the plant lower the pH? pH is a function of the concentration of hydrogen ions. The more hydrogen ions, the lower the pH. Hydrogen ions can be produced by the action of the hydrogen ATPase family of proteins. When these are active, hydrogen ions are released into the soil and the pH drops. As the pH drops, iron is released from the soil particles and becomes available as soluble iron. Minerals have additional features that need to be considered for proper mineral absorption. In the case of iron, it exists in the soil primarily in the Fe3 or ferric state, but it must be changed to the ferrous or Fe2 state before it can move into bean or soybean plants. These plants have evolved a system that facilitates this conversion. Embedded in the cell membrane is a protein called FRO. FRO reduces ferric iron to ferrous iron at the root surface by transporting an electron from NADPH. Here, we have seen that the plant is capable of modifying its soil environment to increase mineral availability. This has a direct effect on the soil by decreasing the pH, thereby providing soluble ferric iron to the FRO protein. While this protein can convert ferric iron into ferrous iron, additional help is required to move the iron into the plant. Another protein, a ferrous iron transporter, also found in the root cell membrane, is needed to move the Fe2 into the root cortex. Part 2 of this animation will describe the action of this protein, as well as the mechanisms used by the plant to distribute the mineral to leaves and seeds.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, we're looking at your shared screen now.
All right, fantastic. Well, that gives you just a glimpse of what happens in plant physiology with respect to how the intelligence that's inherent in the physiological makeup of a plant. And again, just to remind you, when we use the word physiology of a plant, we're talking about the chemistry of the plant. And more specifically, we're talking about a composite and a series of chemical reactions. And what you just saw is a presentation on one element, the element of iron, and how a plant is organized to harvest what it needs from the soil. And it does so through a series of chemical reactions. Another process that was not mentioned in this presentation is that of osmosis. Osmosis is a process in chemistry whereby salts will move from one side of a membrane to another side of a membrane in order to create an equilibrium in the distribution of the salt in the solution on each side of the membrane. So when a plant becomes low in the quantity or the concentration of cation salts that are inside the sap of the plant, it will tend to pull new cations in order to create equilibrium. And it does so by pulling those cations from the soil solution. And the soil solution is made up of cations that are very softly bound to the negative exchange sites on the surface of clay. So we discussed yesterday the cation exchange site. And one of the things that you saw in a clip was the strength of the bond between the element and the negatively charged site on the surface of the clay particle. And if the element has one charge, then like you'll see here in a chart that I'm showing you here, and where we have the element of ammonia, NH4+, it has 1+. So it's one positive charge. And that means that ammonia is not held very tightly to the surface of the clay particle, whereas other elements like calcium or iron have multiple charges, plus charges. That means that they're held more tightly to the surface of the clay particle. One of the things about osmosis is people often refer to it as osmotic strength. So the osmotic strength is something that's constantly fluctuating, and it is a relationship between the concentration of ions in the soil solution and the concentration of ions in the liquid solution or the sap of the plant. And the plant will utilize its osmotic force capacity to pull these ions off of the surface of the clay. And it's most easy to pull the nitrogen-based molecule of ammonia than it is to pull other base elements such as calcium off of the surface of the particle. So more osmotic force is required to pull an element like calcium than the osmotic force required to pull a molecule like ammonia. So today we're going to move more now into talking about the elements, the macro elements the macronutrients that are of value in supporting the physiological functions or the metabolic activity inside of a plant at the cellular level. The first element will be nitrogen. Let's approach the understanding of nitrogen first from the point of view of farm management. Regardless of the type of farming that you do, whether you are an organic farmer, you're a regenerative organic farmer, you are a conventional farmer using chemicals, one of the most important things that you will do in the management system that you follow to support the growth of plants for crop purposes is the management of nitrogen. And the relationship of nitrogen to your soil, to the environment that you maintain in your soil, is a very critical factor in determining your success in producing plants for the purpose of crop production. Ammonia and nitrate are the predominant inorganic forms of nitrogen in soils. Ammonia exists in an exchangeable and non-exchangeable form. Nitrite and nitrous oxide are present in soil in lesser quantities, and these, by the way, are examples of non-exchangeable forms. Plants normally use nitrogen in only the ammonium and the nitrate forms. And we'll talk about that quite a bit as we go through this session. First, a little bit of background on nitrogen. Atmospheric nitrogen, atmospheric N, is the major reservoir for N in the nitrogen cycle. Air is 79% nitrogen gas in the form of N2. And it's a very interesting idea in farm management to think about the sources of nitrogen that are available to you and where they are located. Everyone is familiar with buying a bag of fertilizer which contains a certain analysis for N, P, and K. These are normally 3 digits that are separated by a dash. So you may have 10, 10, 10 on the bag. The first element is the nitrogen element. So that bag is a source of nitrogen fertilizer. Or if you have composted the manure from chickens, you will have when you analyze that manure, you can produce an N, P, and K analysis. So regardless of the source, the first element in the analysis is the nitrogen element. In nature, the most prevalent and the most abundant source of nitrogen is actually in the air. An interesting agricultural economic consideration in this factor is when you buy a bag of fertilizer and you buy an analysis of N, P, and K on that bag of fertilizer, that material had to be manufactured somewhere in a factory and shipped to your location. Nitrogen, in many different forms, chemical molecules are shipped all over the world to deliver fertilizers, to deliver plant foods to crops for producing food, feed, and fiber, which are the 3 predominant forms of production with plants in agriculture. We're either producing food, we're producing feed for an animal, or we're producing fiber. In the case of nitrogen, it's important to remember, especially in organic agriculture, that the most abundant, the most freely available access to nitrogen that you have is actually in the air that is around you. And there are ways to maximize the movement of that nitrogen into the plant's environment where it can be utilized as a plant food for supporting crop production. Leguminous plants host a microorganism called rhizobia, which fixes nitrogen. And there are many types of legumes that do this. Alfalfa, soybeans, the beans that you eat, all of the beans that you eat in your diet are capable of hosting rhizobia. Very important for all of you to establish rhizobia in your fields. And Chris will be able to teach you about and demonstrate to you about the process of inoculating any beans that you're growing with rhizobia bacteria. As a general rule, when you establish rhizobia bacteria in your field as a nitrogen, and you want to do this because of its nitrogen fixing capabilities, which means it takes the gas form of nitrogen that's in the air and it reduces it to an ammonia form of nitrogen, and it leaks or it exudes that ammonia into the soil solution, and ammonia is immediately available to plants as a source of nitrogen. Okay. Legumes fix substantial amounts of nitrogen. Alfalfa crop, for example, has the potential to fix several hundred pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. Rainfall also takes atmospheric nitrogen and deposits that nitrogen into your soil. Commercial fertilizers are also derived from atmospheric nitrogen pool. The major step is to combine nitrogen gas with hydrogen to form ammonia. And hydrous ammonia is then used as a starting point to manufacture other nitrogen fertilizers. And hydrous ammonia and other nitrogen products derived from ammonia can then supplement other nitrogen sources for crop production. In organic agriculture, nitrogen can also become available for plant use from organic sources. Before these organic sources are available to plants, they must be converted to inorganic forms. Nitrogen is available to plants in either ammonia or nitrate forms. Now let's pause here for a minute to make sure that everyone is crystal clear on this chemistry. Regardless of how you get the nitrogen to the field, whether you're using urea or anhydrous ammonia, or whether you're using chicken manure or the manure from cattle or from a goat or from a sheep or from a rabbit or from worms. In the end, there needs to be a conversion of all forms of nitrogen, of all raw materials, such that that conversion liberates ammonia and nitrate into the soil solution. Ammonia and nitrate are water-soluble they're water-soluble molecular forms of nitrogen that a plant will take across the membrane of the root hair. And then those forms of nitrogen immediately enter the metabolic system or the physiological processes in the growing plant. There's going to be a session after my talks on soil science where Dr. Steve McClaskey will go into some of the sources of nitrogen that you can utilize in the system of agriculture that we would call regenerative organic agriculture. But briefly, just to introduce the concept of nitrogen, animal manure and other waste can be important sources for nitrogen for plant growth. The amount of nitrogen supplied by manure will vary depending on the type of livestock, how they're handled, and then the rate applied, which means the volume of manure that you apply to the field, and the method of application, whether you leave it on the surface or you incorporate it into the ground. Because the nitrogen form and content of manures widely varies, a manure analysis is recommended to improve nitrogen management. You can even take your composted manures and run them through a nitrogen analysis to at least give you a feel as to whether or not the manure source that you're using is high in nitrogen or not. Manure will have many elements to it that are good for the soil. Nitrogen is one of those elements. In the case of nitrogen, as we demonstrated by video yesterday, and I know that you're going to have soil testing equipment, that same soil testing equipment can be utilized on a sample of manure, preferably composted manure, in order to analyze the nitrogen element in that manure sample, just like a soil sample. You would treat it the same, and then you would get a colorimetric qualitative assessment as to whether or not your manure was high, medium, or low in nitrogen. And it's good to get that kind of information so that you better understand the source of fertilizer and organic material that you're putting into the field. Okay? So this comes back to the point that we made yesterday, that farm management involves managing data. Generating data about the source of fertilizer that you're using, whether it be animal manures or even chemical fertilizers, you need to know the analytical data that goes with the source material that you're utilizing. Even if it's qualitative data, that's okay. It gives you an idea. Crop residues from non-leguminous plants also contain nitrogen, but in relatively small amounts compared to legumes. Nitrogen exists in crop residues in complex organic forms, and the residue must decay, a process that can take several years before nitrogen becomes available for plant use. Now, ideally, in your farm management system, you're not going to maintain a system whereby it takes several years to break down crop residues. If it takes several years to break down your crop residues, I would suggest to you that you're not managing your soils properly. In order to accelerate the breakdown of crop residues, it's important to maintain a very high population of microbiology in your soils, including bacteria and fungi, beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi, which consume organic molecules as a source of food. Whenever the organic materials are broken down, the crop residues are broken down. And whenever they mention complex organic forms, what they're talking about is the nitrogen that is in the crop residues. When it is broken down by microorganisms, those microorganisms use the nitrogen in the crop residues to produce chemical molecules that contain nitrogen. The most common organic chemistry that contains nitrogen is protein. And in inorganic chemistry, there are basically three chemical categories. And the first one, we'll list all four of them. The first one would be proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and fibers. Those are the four classic categories that you'll find in organic chemistry. In the case of protein molecules, protein molecules that's where you will find nitrogen. In the chemical structure of protein molecules, the element of nitrogen will be found. When protein molecules break down, they break down very slowly in the soil. And that's what they're talking about. The decay of those molecules will release nitrogen very slowly in the soil. Now, if you have a high population of microorganisms and you have microorganisms that are dying off and are being biodegraded, that means those protein molecules that are inherent to the anatomy and the physiology of the microorganism population, those molecules will gradually biodegrade, and the nitrogen that is in that protein will be liberated, and it will be liberated at least partially in the form of ammonia and nitrates. The nice thing about creating a soil management system with respect to nitrogen, where you have organic matter added to the field, either from outside or from the incorporation of crop residues, the liberation of ammonia and the liberation of nitrates from that source of nitrogen is a slow release process. And the release of nitrogen from whatever source that you utilize is a very critical factor with respect to the capacity of your soil to hold that nitrogen, and with respect to the capacity of your plant to utilize nitrogen. The ability of plants to utilize nitrogen varies from types of plants. So, for example, corn is well known to be one of the most successful and aggressive plants with regard to consuming nitrogen in the soil. Sugarcane is another one. These are grasses. They're very aggressive at harvesting nitrogen from the soil. If your soil is very coarse, and let's say you have somewhat sandy soil, or the sand and the silt content are fairly high in the textural analysis of your soil, this often means that the cation exchange capacity will be low because the percentage of clay is low in your soil. If this is the case, and you're dealing with a soil classification that tends to be high in silt and sand, which means that the cation exchange capacity tends to be low, it's really smart to use sources of nitrogen where the nitrogen is liberated in the form of ammonia and in the form of nitrates on a slow release basis. By contrast, if you dump a lot of urea, which has a very high percentage of available nitrogen, it liberates ammonia and nitrates very quickly, and it is produced from hydrocarbons. But in a coarse soil that has a high percentage of silt and sand, the capacity of those soils to hang on to those molecules of ammonium nitrate is relatively poor. As a result, what happens? That nitrate and that ammonia will tend to infiltrate through those coarse soils and will end up in the water system. It'll end up in your wells on your farm. And this is not a very good thing for our water system. So especially with regard to nitrogen, and the form of nitrogen that we're talking about here, ammonia and nitrates, because they're water soluble, they move easily with the water. And if water moves through your soils very quickly, as is the case with a more coarse soil, it becomes even more valuable to use a source of nitrogen where the raw material liberates nitrogen on a slow release basis. So slow release is a magic word when it comes to the delivery of nitrogen to your farm. And this is extremely important if the soils that you're working with tend to be coarse and carry a low cation exchange capacity. Soil organic matter is a major source of nitrogen. Organic matter is primarily composed of rather stable material called humus that is collected over a long period of time. Now, this is an interesting point in discussing soil chemistry, is that what makes up organic matter in soil is really measured by the rate of decomposition. Molecules that are carbohydrate based are the fastest decomposing molecules, organic molecules that you put into your soil. These are simple sugars, or they are even complex sugar molecules like polysaccharides. And proteins will be the second most easy organic molecule that can be decomposed in your soil. And when we say decompose, you should think of the rate of decomposition. So carbohydrates decompose at a relatively fast rate. Proteins at a slightly slower rate. Lipid chemistries or oil-based chemistries, which are organic molecules, they decompose at a slower rate than proteins. And then finally, we come to the fibers, the fourth category of organic chemistry in your soil. And in this case, you're talking about cellulose and lignin. These two chemistries break down very slowly, especially lignins. When you see the word humus, a word that you probably have all heard before, humus is a stage of decomposition of organic matter in your soil where the rate of decomposition has slowed to a very slow rate. And that means that the molecules that make up organic matter, when it reaches the status that we would normally call it humus, here they refer to it as being relatively stable in the soil. Relatively stable means that it is not decomposing at a very fast rate at that stage. It is normally indistinguishable. You cannot tell what the raw material was that was responsible for feeding that development of humus. And one of the chemistries in humus that is highly important for soil stability is a polysaccharide chemistry. Humus is normally composed of about 25% complex sugar molecules, which are called polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are highly interactive with the clay fraction of your soil. And when we talk about soil physical properties, in the last stage of the presentation on soil science, we will talk about soil physical properties. The polysaccharide fraction of humus is the most important fraction of humus, giving rise to aggregate formation and soil stability. This is a soil structural consideration. This is part of soil physics. Holding nitrogen in your soil, in addition to the clay fraction of your soil and the CEC, the humus fraction of your soil, and especially the polysaccharide molecule in humus, enhances and increases CEC, cation exchange capacity, or the capacity of your soil to hold these cations in place so they don't flush out with water and move down below the root zone, and whereby they are less available to soils, less available to plants. One thing I will tell you about the use of nitrogen fertilizers in conventional agriculture. We are really guilty in agriculture of supplying nitrogen in forms that are so plant available. That means water soluble. And we're also very guilty in applying fertilizers, especially in the Midwestern United States. We apply these fertilizers in forms where we put large amounts that exceed the capacity of the soils to hold the nitrogen. And a large fraction of this nitrogen that we apply on farms in the Midwestern United States ends up in the water system. And it ends up in rivers, and it ends up ultimately in the Caribbean. You guys are actually suffering from the mismanagement of nitrogen in the Midwestern Corn Belt of the United States. So you can blame us for that problem. Chris is primary person responsible for all those problems.
Good luck.
Soils contain about 2,000 pounds of nitrogen in organic forms from each % of organic matter. Let's repeat that. Soils contain approximately 2,000 pounds of nitrogen in organic forms. This means that these are organic molecules like proteins in each % of organic matter in your soil. That's a lot of nitrogen, but it has to be liberated. In order to liberate it, you need biological life in your soil. This portion of organic matter decomposes at a rather slow rate and releases about 20 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year for each % of organic matter. Now, this is the classic information about the evolution of organic matter and the liberation of nitrogen. But you can accelerate that in your farm management system by enhancing the biological life of your soil. Nitrification is a biological process. It rapidly proceeds in warm, moist, well-aerated soils and slows at soil temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. In denitrification, bacteria convert NO3 to nitrogen gases that are lost to the atmosphere. Denitrifying bacteria use nitrate instead of oxygen in the metabolic processes. The process takes place in waterlogged soils and with ample organic matter to provide energy for bacteria. For these reasons, denitrification is generally limited to topsoil. Denitrification can rapidly proceed when soils are warm and become saturated for 2 or 3 days. Here comes the farm management principle of managing the hydraulics of your soil, which means managing water in your soil. I'm going to guess that many of you will use some forms of irrigation to produce crops there on your island. How many of you are already using some forms of irrigation? Raise your hands. Okay, so my image of you here is really on a small square. So Chris, how many raised their hands? What percentage of them?
In 3/4 at least, almost everybody really uses irrigation here. It's
Yes, I know
super,
it's very dry. I
it's
know
super
it's very
challenging.
dry.
Yeah.
Yes. So especially in your dry season, you're going to become highly dependent upon your irrigation system. If you over irrigate, if you go to sleep and you take a nap in the afternoon and you fall asleep and it's midnight when you wake up and you've over irrigated your patch, whatever it is, watermelons, papaya, you will have initiated the process of denitrification. Denitrification means that valuable fertilizer or plant food that you have in your soil is going to begin to be liberated into the air as a gas. That's denitrification. This is performed by denitrifying bacteria, and it is a byproduct of either excessive amounts of rain or over irrigating. So when we get to the business of talking about the hydraulics of water in soil, you're going to find that even though we will be talking about water, we'll be talking about soil physics, it is all of these processes, all of these management activities are very closely linked to the chemistry of your soil and the behavior of these molecules in your soil profile. Immobilization, or the tie-up of soil nitrogen, can temporarily reduce the amount of plant available nitrogen. Bacteria that decompose high carbon, low nitrogen residues such as corn stalks or grain straw, they need more nitrogen to digest the material than is present in the residue. What do? They want to make proteins. Where do they get the nitrogen to make the proteins? The bacteria will harvest it out of the soil chemistry. They'll take nitrates and ammonia directly out of the soil chemistry. They will break those molecules with enzymes and other methods, and they will utilize that nitrogen to reconstruct it into the chemistry of a protein molecule. Immobilization occurs when the growing microbes use ammonia and present in the soil to build proteins. I just said that. The actively growing bacteria that immobilize some soil nitrogen also break down soil organic matter to release available nitrogen during the growing season. So it's a pretty complex process, and there's a lot of give and take between the biological life of your soil and the demand that it has for nitrogen versus the process of using that biological life in your soil to actually release nitrogen. So it's a dynamic that's going back and forth all of the time in the life of your soil. And you should think of your soils as very much alive, and part of that life, as is the case with all life, is a complex of chemical reactions that is going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never stops. There's often a net gain of nitrogen during their growing season because the additional nitrogen in the residue will be the net gain after immobilization and the mineralization process. Nitrogen losses from a soil system. When developing nitrogen programs and evaluating environmental effects, consider nitrogen's mobility factor in the soil. Sandy soils will lose nitrogen from leaching, while heavy, poorly drained soils will lose nitrogen from denitrification. Losing nitrogen nitrates by leaching is actually a physical event, whereas what we described before was a biological event. Leaching is the loss of nitrate as it moves with the soil water, generally excess water, below the root zone. Nitrate that moves below the root zone has the potential to enter the groundwater or the surface water through drainage systems. Coarse textured soils have low water holding capacity and therefore more potential to lose nitrates from leaching. Sandy soils, for instance, may retain only a ½ inch of water per foot of soil, while some silt loam or clay loams may contain up to 2 inches of water per foot.
It's like 1 centimeter to like 7 centimeters, 5 centimeters.
One inch is 2.5 centimeters.
Yeah.
Nitrate can be leached from any soil if rainfall or irrigation moves water through the root zone. Significant losses from some surface supplied nitrogen sources can occur through the process of volatilization. In this process, nitrogen is lost as an ammonia gas. Manure and fertilizer products containing urea can cause nitrogen to be lost this way. Ammonia is an intermediate form of nitrogen during this process that transforms urea to ammonia and nitrates. Incorporating these sources will virtually eliminate volatilization losses. Incorporation is the magic word here. Delivery of nitrogen sources to the soil surface is generally not recommended. Some form of incorporation is recommended. Now you can incorporate manually. You can do it mechanically. You can do it with water systems. You can incorporate nitrogen through a drip irrigation system. If you make compost teas, Chris, I think that's one of the things that you're working on is compost teas.
Yes, it is.
Compost teas may contain molecules of nitrogen. So delivery, in this case, we are primarily discussing nitrogen and the fact that it can be easily lost from your soil profile. Incorporating it through drip irrigation systems is an excellent way of delivery. And compost tea is one source of nitrogen. There will be a small amount of nitrogen in compost teas. But delivering that through a system, which is a drip system, is an excellent way of getting it into the ground. Because typically with a drip system, you do not tend to deliver water in volumes that exceed the capacity of the soil to carry that water, to hold that water, okay? This can become a little bit more difficult to manage if your soils are really heavy with clays. What happens? Even in a drip system, it will tend to run off. It will run off into the ditch, it'll run off into the creek, and you'll lose your nitrogen that way. If your soils are really coarse and it's sandy, then you can lose nitrogen through even a drip irrigation system if you over irrigate. And you'll hear this over and over again when studying systems of irrigation. Regardless of what you're trying to deliver to your crop, over irrigating is basically a farm management mistake. And it wastes a lot of water. And water can be expensive in farming today. 80% of water use, of fresh water use by humans around the globe is used in agriculture. 20% by people in industry, but 80% is of utilization of all freshwater sources that we use as people on our planet are going into the field of agriculture to produce food, to produce fiber, and to produce feed. So, and indeed, many of you are using freshwater sources, and it won't take long because you're in a dry climate, as you intensify the use of water in your climate, in your environment, in your production systems, you will probably find that these percentages will also be present even on your island as you become more self-sufficient with food to the extent that you're dependent on irrigation systems. You're going to consume your fresh water in agriculture. How you do that is a really important part of your soil management system. If you manage your soils in such a way that you enhance and you increase your water holding capacity, it typically means that you will lose less water to leaching, you will lose less water to evaporation, you will lose less water even to runoff. So managing your soils so that they are permeable, they will take in water. The infiltration of water is something that you will manage in farm management. The capacity of your soils to hold water is something that you will manage in soil management, a part of your farm management system. Okay. Nitrogen loss from volatilization is greater when soil pH is higher than 7.3. When air temperatures are high, which will be common on your island. You're going to have a lot of high temperatures, which increases the probability of evaporation at the soil surface. There is a gradient between the atmospheric ambient environment and the soil environment. A fraction of your soil environment is air. And at that gradient, at that point where these two environments come together, the relationship between those two environments in terms of the chemistry of those two environments, which are primarily gas chemistries, that determines your evaporation rate. A lot of farms today make a big effort to try to manage that interface between the soil environment and the environment that is above your soil in such a way that you do not lose water and that you do not lose volatile chemistries like ammonia and nitrate to the atmosphere. Understanding that the interface between the environment of the soil and the environment of the air, that is actually a microclimate that you need to manage. And it will be a benefit to you chemically, it will be a benefit to you physically, and it will be a benefit to you biologically. There are microorganisms that live in that microclimate. One of the most common microorganisms, groups of microorganisms that live at the surface of your soil, at the interface of those two environments, are algae and cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria, many of them, are nitrogen-fixing microorganisms. Maintaining a microclimate right at the interface between those two environments, which is supportive of algae and cyanobacteria, will deliver about 40 to 50 pounds of actual nitrogen per acre, or 40 to 50 kilos of actual nitrogen per hectare per growing season. The growing season, in this case, we will call it a 4 or 5 month period of time. Okay. So that's a general statement. We want to illuminate that there are many environments in your soil that need to be managed. Substantial amounts of nitrogen are lost from the soil system through crop removal. This is a big one. This is very important. This is something that you all need to be aware of. Any soil laboratory that is providing not only the hard data about the chemical composition of your soil, when they give you recommendations about how much plant food that you need to deliver to your crop, they need to know what crop you're growing and what is the level of productivity that you are expecting with that crop. So, for example, if you were able to send your soil samples to the University of the West Indies or into the United States or even to the Netherlands, where you have sophisticated soil laboratories, when they analyze your soil, they're going to, in order to give you recommendations, they want to know what crop you're growing and what your yield expectations are. And that's normally you give that to the lab on a form when you submit your soil samples. What they will tell you in return is that we know that if you produce a crop at this level of productivity, which may be metric tons per hectare, it could be measured in many different ways. It may be pounds, it may be bushels if it's grain, but no matter how you measure your output from your farm production system, your farm production system is a business of mining and harvesting plant nutritional elements from your soil. Replacing them is part of farm management. Understanding that you're mining and harvesting these elements from your soil, understanding that you need to replace them to maintain the productive capacity of your soil, is labeled regenerative. So when you hear us talk about regenerative, this is mathematically a part of that system. This is chemically part of what it means to be regenerative. In other words, if your farm management system and your approach to farm management, which is always involved harvesting and mining and removing nutritional elements, plant nutritional elements, which are forms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and many other micronutrients. If you're removing them from your field and you're not doing enough to replace them, you're not practicing regenerative agriculture. So regenerative agriculture you should replace what you're removing from the field. And ideally, under the label of regenerative, these molecular forms, the raw materials that feed these molecular forms and their availability in your field to your plants should actually be accumulating, while at the same time you're harvesting and removing these elements from your field. Do we understand that, Chris?
Yeah. Any questions around that one, guys? We're getting a lot of yeses, but I think there's a little fatigue. How about a coffee break here, Jim?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Realize what they have been done wrong.
Oh.
Other
Oh, yeah?
than not replenishing anything.
Everyone's they're starting to draw conclusions about what they've been doing.
They are? Well, let's get some feedback. What do they think they've been doing?
Anybody want to respond to that? They just haven't been replacing their nutrients. I mean, they just haven't been putting enough back, basically, is the overall feel.
Well, let's ask a question. Let's ask the question.
Hold on, we got to pause. They already jumped up for coffee. I'm sorry.
All right. All right. So we have this example here in the document about corn. As we mentioned, corn is a hungry consumer of nitrogen. At 250 bushels per acre, corn will remove about 175 pounds of nitrogen with the grain. Crop removal, doesn't matter what the crop is, but crop removal accounts for a majority of the nitrogen that leaves the soil system. This is largely because all crops, grains, fruits, vegetables, root crops, they all contain protein. They all contain amino acids. And these chemistries utilize the element of nitrogen. Where do they get the nitrogen? They harvest it and they mine it from the soil. And a regenerative ag system will not only replenish what is taken from the field by the crop, but it is a system of agriculture whereby we are attempting to increase the carrying capacity of the soil with respect to crop production. And there are various mechanisms and procedures and programs that would fall under the heading of regenerative systems, which are designed to do just that, which means that while you're taking so many elements, so many units, kilos per hectare or pounds per acre, you are actually delivering those molecules back to the field to support the next crop. And not only support it, but to build up surpluses of those molecules in your soil system. Chris, do you know any farmers that are taking more nitrogen out of their fields than they are delivering back?
Yeah, I mean, you can drive down the road and start seeing the farms that are doing it, probably.
Yes, it's pretty much everywhere. Now, let me tell you a very interesting trick to all of this. If you are in the agricultural industries, as I am, and also Chris, you may know, especially in the United States farming today, a large percentage of the land that's farmed is actually rented. The farmer does not own the land, they're renting it. And people who are renting land are notorious for abusing the land and not, which means very technically that whenever they take their crop production off of the field, they do not replace the nutrients that they remove from the field. They'll tend to mine the field, and gradually the field will degrade with respect to its carrying capacity, and the concentration or the quantity of these molecules, such as the nitrogen molecules that we're discussing here today, the quantity degrades over time. Renting farmland, the renters who are renting land are famous for mining the fields in a non-regenerative way and not replacing the nutrients that are in the field. And if any of you are farm owners, if you own land and you want to rent it to your neighbor to be a farmer, you should be very conscientious of this fact, that people who rent land, they often do not manage the land in a regenerative way. It is estimated that as much as 60% of the farming that's done in the United States, especially in the Midwest, is done on rented land. And are any of you renting the land that you're farming?
Ants? Anybody?
We have a style here that the government, you will have a piece of land.
Yeah.
It's called rent ground. So you rent it from the government.
Yeah.
The land will never become yours,
Uh-huh.
but still
You can inherit.
you rent it from the government.
So you're kind of leasing it long term.
Yeah, for
Yes.
60 years.
Yes.
And if you die, your children will get it.
But your children are the ones that get to rent it. They don't own it.
You can never own it.
Okay. So there's a system of land rental here, I guess you would say, in which the government owns most of the land, if not all of it. If it's, yeah. So you rent the ground from the government in a long-term fashion, and you can never own it, but you have the claim of it for long-term rental. And even if you pass away, your children will get the opportunity to rent it, but only rent it. You can never buy it or own it.
Right,
Right?
right.
Yeah. So
And
it's
does anybody rent land on a year-by-year basis?
I don't think so. It doesn't seem like that's a very normal thing here, at least in this group.
Okay, but is it also possible that you can have private land that you actually own yourself?
Is there private land ownership aside from the government rental?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
How does that work though? I mean, how do people get to do that?
Title, they get title?
More expensive.
So
I have one, but build a house on it.
so it's just okay. So it's just
Pay for it.
so it's mostly just long-term rental of land here, and then a very few people can purchase land, but it's wildly expensive, so
Exactly.
almost nobody does it. Okay.
Okay. So let's have a raise of hands. Those that are farming on some land now, how many are in one of these long-term lease arrangements?
If you're farming now, are you using that long-term rental arrangement?
Yeah, you own.
Almost everybody.
Yeah.
Almost everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, this business of mining the fields,
1 second.
it's
Large piece of land like that. They're very rich person.
Yeah. I mean, if you own enough land to farm, you are incredibly rich around here. I mean,
mhm.
I don't know. It reminds me of Iowa, but it sounds like it's probably a little more expensive relative to their economy here.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was in Indonesia traveling with a professor of agriculture from a university, and we were talking about my father. My father lives on a small farm, what Chris and I would call a small farm in the state of Illinois. And he has about 40 hectares of land.
Jesus Christ. Come on, man. Come on.
Relative to other farms in Iowa, that's barely enough to do anything.
So a big farm is as big as Curacao.
Yeah. Yeah. But,
I get it.
yeah, they don't. Yeah, it's rough to believe.
Right. Well, we tend to live in a land-rich socioeconomic system where but the value of land, there's a high probability that the value of your land on your island is much greater than the value of our land in the Midwestern United States.
How much land can you buy for $100,000?
How much land could you buy for $100,000, Jim?
In where my dad lives?
Sure.
Oh, in acres, let's say you could buy about 30 or 35 acres maybe.
Acres.
Yeah.
Acres.
35 acres. 35 acres is about 14 hectares.
14 hectares.
14 hectares.
How does that compare to land purchase prices here, guys?
A house costs $100,000.
So just one house. Well, I mean, a house back home can cost that much too, but
Yeah, this is without a house.
Varies from 25 to 50 guilders per square meter.
so they'll pay 35 to 50 guilders per square meter. A guilder is $0.75.
Okay. Per square meter. How much again?
Between 35 and 50 guilders per square meter.
$20 per square meter.
$20 per square meter, you could say.
Okay. Okay. Well, multiply times 10,000. That's a hectare.
So then times,
That's pretty expensive.
Yes.
so it's like $200,000.
Yeah,
Jesus,
exactly.
for 1 hectare. For 1 hectare.
For 1 hectare. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Terribly rich.
right. Okay, I start to understand a little bit more now. Yeah, it's interesting because the quality of the land is compared to ours is lower from an agronomic perspective, but the location, I mean, gosh, you guys are almost oceanfront property everywhere here.
All year
Yes,
farming. You
no,
don't
no,
have
but
seasons.
I'm only talking about agricultural land.
That's only for
It's
yeah.
cheap like that.
Only
If you
agriculture.
go for the
Residential?
seaside land,
Yeah.
then you're talking about 250 guilders.
So
200 guilders
that's
per
cheap.
hectare.
That's for agricultural land. So if you want
Oh
like
my.
oceanfront, it's 250
Oh,
guilders per square meter, which is
Right.
$150. 150 per square meter. So that's $1.5 million for a hectare.
Yeah.
Gross.
Well, we have some lands that are near the cities that are quite valuable also.
You guys,
And it's so you have two values. You have agricultural value and the development values.
Yes, yes.
Your island is basically dominated by development values.
That's why you try to build houses on farmlands.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, if you're going to spend money like that on land, that's why you cannot justify that kind of money for a hectare of land if your business is just agriculture.
So that's why we don't purchase them.
Right.
Yeah, but that's why we have this ground that we rent from the government forever.
Right. So the perpetual government lease starts to look very attractive in that kind of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How much do you
So
pay
this-
per year for that, or something? You know,
It depends.
sure.
If I have got a land like 40 years ago, you probably will pay $100 a year, for example. Then yeah, but me who got a land now, let's say 10 years ago, I pay 1,000 guilders a year. But he who has the land for 40 years will pay 10 guilders a year.
Per hectare.
Yes.
So 40 years ago, it might have been 10 guilders per hectare per year.
No, it's 1,000.
Now it's 1,000 guilders per hectare per year.
Okay.
Is like
So that's about $700.
6 to 7, something in there, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
Expensive.
still, yeah. Even, yeah, that's what, 3 times what you'd pay in Iowa, something like that.
That's right.
Yeah. For renting like corn ground in Iowa, you could expect to pay like $200 an acre
a year.
a year. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's about 500. That's about 500 a hectare.
So still cheaper.
Still cheaper. Yeah.
Yeah, but you got land.
But if you're going to grow specialty crops and not just corn, normally specialty crop land, even in the United States, you pay a higher rental rate for that.
For us, it doesn't matter what you
Yeah. There's no dependence on the crop you grow. It's just, it is what it is here.
Why
Yeah,
is
yeah.
why is it that you pay less with corn?
That's strange.
Because those are the birds.
Why would you pay less for corn ground than other ground, Jim?
Because the rental value is based on the type of crop that you can grow there in that location, and in that little microenvironment, perhaps. If you're renting black dirt from a river valley in New York, and it's muck soil, and you can grow potatoes and onions on there, you're going to pay a higher rental rate there than growing corn land. Even in Iowa, if the land has a lot of slope on it, and it's mostly good for growing grass to feed animals, then when you rent that land, you're going to pay a pretty low rate of rent. But if it's flat and it's black and it's a deep topsoil, then that's when you start paying $200 an acre for corn ground. And we have corn ground in Iowa that probably rents for over $300 an acre.
Oh, sure.
And we'll have corn ground in Iowa that will rent for $50 or $100 an acre. And if it's really got a lot of slope on it, and it's really appropriate only to grow grass, then you get down into $25 to $35 an acre.
Yeah.
A year. Yeah, per
So
acre.
if you have like a poor land that you pay less for, and then you grow something else by using certain techniques, what they charge you still for the? Or they just
I mean, that would be an individual contract between you and your land. So if you use land to grow a crop other than what would be ideal, say you take sloping pasture and tear it up and plant it to corn, and you make a corn crop out of it, would they charge more? They charge you more to rent that ground?
In Iowa, probably not, but any landowner that has land that's highly erodible that needs to be in grass, if you rented it out, you would not want the person to rent it and grow a row crop on it, because you're going to lose a lot of your topsoil. The land would be damaged a lot from growing those type of crops, and the landlord would prohibit that.
That'd likely be something written into the contract. If you're getting
Yes.
a rate that is, absurdly low for a row crop. You're paying $50 an acre for grassland. It would be said that you are renting pasture ground in the contract.
Can't plow it up.
Yeah. So if you plow it up, you violate your contract. You lose your right to farm that ground. So that gets into a whole other aspect of like managing your rentals and property in a other way. Other questions, thoughts on this one? All right, we're good, Jim.
I have a question.
Oh, no, we got one.
I have a question. Before, you were talking about like the soya beans that means a lot of iron.
Sure.
Do it depend on what you are growing, that how much of that type of nutrient you will have to add at that type of plant?
Like the density of the plants?
Yeah, let's say, okay, soya bean, and you'll have to put extra iron nutrition to it because it needs more iron than other plants. Let's say a corn.
Needs less iron.
They had a clip before this.
Could you ask this in a more concise way?
Which I did just now. I was asking
So if you,
each crop.
yeah. So you could, do you tailor fertilization to each crop that you're doing?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, he mentioned at one point that when you send away a test to like a university for a soil test, you need to include in that the information of what crop you're going to grow and how much you would like to get out of it.
Yes.
Because then they'll have very specific, they have formulas, they've studied how much a single plant will use of nitrogen, of iron, of blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So that when they extrapolate that to the acre, hectare, 1,000-acre scale, they can tell you that many plants will use that much nitrogen per acre. So you should apply this much because this much will be available. Yeah. And then you'll lose for that crop. But so that's where if the soil tests are giving you specific recommendations of fertilization, it's generally, well, it can be a general of just general crop health for plants, but in agronomy today, that's a little weak. It's corn or beans, and they know exactly what to do for corn or beans. So
depends on your location. On your island there, the type of crops that you grow, probably a lot of vegetables and fruits. I think that we could probably find for you, if it's not already available on your island, we could find it from neighboring islands or possibly the University of the West Indies Agricultural School. And another source would be in Gainesville, Florida at the University of Florida, where you have a subtropical environment. And the data that you would need, that you're looking for, is, let's say that you want to grow watermelons, and how much, what would be the normal plant food requirements that would be appropriate for a watermelon crop, and understanding what the needs of the watermelon crop are from a chemical point of view is good to know, regardless of the system of agriculture that you're using. So if you're growing your crops organically, regenerative organic, biodynamic, conventional, in all cases, it would be good to understand what would be normally recommended whenever you're growing a particular type of crop. And Chris, I think we could actually get that information for them fairly easy. We would need to have a list of the crops, and then we would start pulling that data from some of the resources that we have. University of Florida would be a place to get it. University of the West Indies would be a place to get it. There may be other places besides those two where we can isolate bodies of data that would be appropriate for the island there, so that they would have at least a starting point of understanding what the need would be from a plant food point of view.
All right, so I'll look for what generalized nutrient needs of crops, and then just go crop by crop.
Go crop by crop. And you know, this is, you know, all farmers are a little bit guilty of not making the extra effort to understand all of these things, you know, to generate the data and then work with the data. It doesn't matter what type of farming you're using. If you don't respect the data, if you don't produce a little bit of data, or at least understand what you're taking out of the soil, for example, and understand that you need to get that much back into the soil. Even if you're practicing what you think is a regenerative organic system, you need to at least have an idea if you're if you're actually practicing regenerative and you understand regenerative mathematically. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, they got it.
Okay. So nitrogen can also be lost from a field through soil erosion and runoff. You normally don't lose a lot of nitrogen from this point of view, but it's very real, and you should be conscientious. Soil erosion is not a good idea. You want to control it. There are really two types of erosion: wind erosion and water erosion. And managing erosion is something that you're going to have to do with respect to soil management in your farm management system. Injecting fertilizers, injecting manures, whatever compost teas you're working with, make sure that they get into the ground so that you don't have nutrient losses from when it rains hard, or from any irrigation water that doesn't, you know, infiltrate into the soil. A lot of times irrigation water will run off as well.
That's nutrients, nitrogen.
So we got a question here.
Like nitrogen to the soil, right?
So yes, in very small amounts.
Very small amounts.
Because it's capturing it from the atmosphere as it falls.
But then they say too much watering erodes. Let's say that it runs off it, the nitrogen.
Yeah, leaches. Yeah.
I didn't have a question. It's just thinking like, how does it balance? Because how do you know?
It's trying to rectify in his brain. So like rain pulls nitrogen from the air and deposits it into the soil, but also water can be responsible for leaching nitrogen from the soil. And just trying to kind of get it straight in his head, you know, what's the balance being struck between those and other processes?
As a general rule, all over the world, weather has degraded the capacity of soils to hold these molecular forms of plant foods. Weathering. This is a process that takes place over long periods of time. Most soils around the world are weathered quite severely. I'm going to guess that the volcanoes that have given rise to the island that you're on, these are all islands in the Caribbean that are a byproduct of volcanic activity. So these volcanoes that were originally active volcanoes that came up out of the water to create your islands, the age is quite old, and the weathering has involved tens of thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, for sure. As a result, most of the Caribbean islands are dealing with highly eroded soils. They've been broken down, they've been weathered pretty bad, and the organic matter contents may be a little bit low. Chris, have you had a chance to see the soils very much on the island?
Sure, yeah, I've toured around.
And what color are you looking at most of the time?
Oh, it's tan, like 0.5% to 1.5% maybe. But there are also other soils that are darker and rich. It depends on where you're at, the history of the ground, of course. Whether it's been covered or not.
Yes.
All right, guys. Yeah.
So, because on the west side of the island, you have volcano active mountains, and there you can see the soil is darker. But on the east side of the island, it's less as dark as you can see.
So comment on like the west side of the island, you tend to see darker soils in general, and that's where there was more volcanic activity, or at least the mountain, there's more rocks, it's higher. And on the east side, it's a lower area and just far more weathered. It's where you tend to see more tan soil.
One of the ways of thinking about that is the aging of the soil. Where you're seeing the darker soils, they may actually be younger soils than the soils that look highly weathered.
That's often used.
Yeah.
The darker part is the ones.
Yeah. Yep.
The whole island.
Okay.
Volcano island.
Yeah.
The whole island. What sort of? The whole island is a volcano. The whole island is a volcano.
Yeah, but some of it, the taller areas have been, there's more material there to weather. So we talked about parent material and how soils formed previously, right? So if we have the higher mountains on the west side, the rockier side, there's material up high that can be weathered over those tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. Whereas on the east side, it tends to be lower and flatter, where it's probably, a while back it finished eroding or was eroded quicker because there was just less material on this side. I mean, that would be one way I could think about it in my mind.
Yeah, that's right.
That sounds reasonable. Okay.
Yes. All right. So here's a few bullet points for crop producers. First one. Although you can add either organic or inorganic forms of nitrogen to the soil, plants only take up the inorganic form of nitrogen. That is, as nitrate and ammonia. Whether it's nitrate or ammonia, one form isn't more important than the other. And all nitrogen sources can be converted to nitrate. Commercial nitrogen fertilizers, legumes, manures, and crop residues are all the initial sources of nitrate and ammonia. Once it's in the plant or water supply, it's impossible to identify the initial source. Nitrate is always present in the soil solution and will move with the soil water. We have to remember that. Inhibiting the conversion of ammonia to nitrate can result in less nitrogen loss and more plant uptake. While it's not possible to totally prevent the movement of some nitrate to water supplies, sound management practices can keep losses within acceptable limits. I think this is something that you'll have to go over with them quite a bit, Chris, is just the management practices and preventing loss. Because this is something that all farmers battle. They do a lot of battle with this. Our farmers try to leave residues on the top of their soils. There's all kinds of conservation methods that are utilized in order to stop losing the plant foods that are in the soil, and how you, all of your tillage practices, how you manage residues, all what you do to protect the soils that you're working with as a natural resource. You know, the effort to add value to soil, to increase its carrying capacity, to enhance its cation exchange capacity, to enhance its water holding capacity. Every dollar that you invest in that, every guilder that you invest in that, you don't want to lose it. You want to protect it. It's like putting money in the bank. So protecting everything that you're doing, you know, all of the techniques that you're going to learn through the course that you're taking with us now. An important part of applying those techniques is to make sure that you don't lose the investment value over time. So my personal opinion is you cannot say that enough, Chris. It's something to be repeated quite often.
Okay, yeah, I'll make a point of it.
Yeah. Soil type and climate greatly affect nitrogen loss from the soil system. We've talked about that quite a bit already. All right. Here's what it looks like when you're dealing with nitrogen deficiency in a papaya plant. For nutrient deficiencies, quite often you will see chlorosis. When you see the leaves turning yellow, that's technically called chlorosis of the leaf. Chlorosis of the leaf is the degradation of the chlorophyll molecule. The chlorophyll molecule is with respect to how it reflects light. You see it as green in color. As the chlorophyll molecule degrades or the concentration becomes less concentrated, there's less reflection of light in the form of green color. So all nutrient losses will tend to produce certain degrees of chlorosis of the leaf. I will point out to you with regard to nitrogen deficiencies, the origination of that chlorosis tends to be close to the stem of the leaf, and it spreads from the center of the leaf, from the main artery of the leaf, out to the periphery of the leaf. Can you see that clearly there, Chris?
Yeah. Yeah, we can see it. It's a little pixelated, but yeah, we can see it.
Right. Identifying deficiencies in your plants is an art that you should learn as farm managers, especially with vegetables, especially with fruits. Understanding your plants, how they grow, and being able to detect deficiencies of this nature is an important art that you want to develop. It's interesting. We describe our business as agricultural science, but I think most people who are deeply involved in this would also describe themselves as having almost an artistic skill at being able to relate to the plant and what's happening to the plant. Is that fair to say? How would you respond to that, Chris?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I once thought about writing a book. You know, I'm not there yet, but I came up with a title, and it was going to be The Art and Science of Farming. Mm-hmm. Art coming first.
Yes. And art is an approach to knowledge which is based on a subjective grasp and intuitive grasp of what you're focused on. And how many of you feel like your relationship with your farming activity is really very subjective, and it perhaps even doesn't seem to be all that objective, but feels very subjective? Raise your hands if that rings a bell. If that
Objective is by the numbers, by the facts. Like anyone can agree with that. Subjective is by what you believe. You make a judgment. Your feeling or a feeling, a gut feeling. Are you getting hands? Anybody?
What? Subjective.
Yeah. So yeah, there's several people.
Yeah, this is the art of farming. This is the art of farming, and it's not to be dismissed. And part of that is what we're describing right here in this picture right now, is almost an intuitive grasp of what you see in front of you, and being able to interpret that as that plant is suffering from a nitrogen deficiency.
So if here,
Got a question.
like here you can see that the yellowness starts from the inside and goes out.
Yeah.
Right. But sometimes, like my papaya plants, I see the reverse. So on the inside is green, and on the outside is yellow.
Yeah, and that would mean something else.
Something else.
Yeah. So just noticing that, on these leaves, the yellow starts in the middle or on the stem and goes out. But then on Roel's leaves, you sometimes see them start on the outside and move in.
All right.
That would mean something else entirely, right?
It does, and we're going to show you a picture of that in just a second. Nitrogen assimilation. So why don't we, this is a short video, and it's got a lot of chemistry in it, but I want you to see what a plant actually does with nitrogen. So we're not, it's not something that you want to try to memorize. It's just a very brief exposure for you, so that you at least have a feel, you have a taste for what a plant actually does with nitrogen. Can you play that video clip for them?
Yeah, sorry, I closed my window real quick. I gotta pull up the document again. 1 second. All right.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the way in which plants uptake and use nitrogen. And that process starts in the soil, where nitrogen is found in a number of forms, including as organic nitrogen, which comes from living things, NH4+, ammonium, NO3- nitrate, and NO2- nitrite. So when things die and decompose, organic nitrogen is converted into ammonium by the process of mineralization, which is done by a number of bacteria and fungal organisms. And then ammonium is converted first to nitrite and then nitrate through the process of nitrification, which is done by bacteria. So we know that plants need nitrogen to make things like the chlorophyll molecule or DNA, but they also need it for amino acids. So I'd like to follow a nitrate molecule through the plant as it is converted into amino acid nitrogen. Plants take up nitrate and ammonium nitrogen through specialized membrane channels. And the process of the conversion of nitrate involves two intermediates, and both those intermediates are very reactive. So the conversion process goes very quickly, and the transcription of the DNA that codes for the enzymes that facilitate those reactions is a function of the concentration of nitrogen in plant cells to ensure that those reactions happen quickly. So in the first step, in which nitrate is converted to nitrite, occurs in the cytoplasm with reducing power from NADH or NADPH, and it is catalyzed by the enzyme nitrate reductase. The second step, because of the reactivity of the intermediates, occurs in the plastids, and that's where nitrite is converted to ammonium by the enzyme nitrate reductase. And this occurs with reducing power from ferredoxin or NADH, depending on the part of the plant in which it's occurring. So where in the plant do these things happen? It turns out it depends to some degree on the form of nitrogen the plant is using and also on the species of plant. So here we have the percentage of different forms of nitrogen found in the xylem, and you'll see that it varies quite a bit with plant species. Okay, so here's the final step where we go from ammonium to glutamine, and this can actually happen through a number of metabolic pathways. This is one called the GOGAT cycle, and you'll see that first we take our ammonium molecule and it joins with a glutamate molecule, and through catalysis with glutamine synthetase and energy from ATP, the nitrate molecule replaces this oxygen down here as an amino group. So it produces a glutamine molecule with two amino groups, just like that. So then we add a molecule of 2-oxoglutarate, which actually comes from the Krebs cycle of cellular respiration. And you'll notice that this molecule is different from glutamate because it has this carbonyl group up here instead of an amino group. So what this can do with catalysis from glutamate synthase and energy from NADH or ferredoxin is to replace that carbonyl group with one of the two amino groups from glutamine. So that produces two glutamate molecules. One of those glutamate molecules is the product of the reaction, and the other is used to combine with another molecule of ammonium to start the cycle all over again. So I should also just mention the role of symbiotic nitrogen fixation. The atmosphere is over 70% N2, where nitrogen molecules are bound with a triple bond. So it takes significant energy to break those triple bonds and make that nitrogen available to the plant, 16 ATPs approximately. But this process can occur in anaerobic root nodules, which are formed through the symbiosis of plant roots with bacteria. The plants in the family Fabaceae do this with bacteria, a number of genera, including the genus Rhizobium, and the alder trees also do this. So another significant source of nitrogen for plants. All right, thanks for listening, and please let me know in the comments if you have any questions.
So that was quite a bit.
So how would you,
All right. Come on, guys.
how would you like about 6 months of that chemistry?
No.
I structured my degree so I could avoid most of that, Jim.
Yeah, I got it. It's tough. the point that I made earlier is that thinking about the growth of these life forms, plants, animals, this is really what it looks like. It is a continuous exercise, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never goes to sleep. These chemical reactions are perpetually taking place. And obviously, what you were exposed to there was a few minutes of explaining some of that chemistry. So nitrogen is assimilated. That's the magic word. Nitrogen is assimilated metabolically and is a component of certain chemical end products that become the material, literally the material that you harvest from your field. When you harvest your field, you are pulling these molecular forms, their end results. You take them out of the field, and then they become food, feed, and fiber for the agricultural industries. You are a farmer / chemist. Farmers are literally industrial chemists. All right.
/ artist too, right?
/ artist. That's exactly right. Okay. Moving on to phosphate. Plants must have phosphorus for normal growth and maturity. Phosphorus plays a role in photosynthesis, respiration, energy storage and transfer, cell division, cell enlargement, and several other processes in plants. A plant must have phosphorus to complete its normal production cycle. Plants consume phosphate only in one form, phosphorus, which is P2O5. P2O5. Phosphate as an element is in many, many different forms, all of which are unavailable to a plant. A plant will only take up phosphorus across the membrane of the root in the form of a phosphorus molecule, which is P2O5. When you see the analysis of a fertilizer, and it says, let's say it says 10, 15, 20, that you'll see that on a bag of fertilizer, for example, or you might see it on a bag of composted cattle manure, 555. The middle number is P, phosphate, and that number legally, by law, is the PTO5 concentration in that source of plant food. Okay. Phosphorus is an important part of crop management. Managing phosphorus can be a very profitable part of growing your crop. The best way to use fertilizers to meet phosphorus changes with the crop, the soil properties, and environmental conditions. Inorganic commercial phosphate fertilizers have evolved over the last several decades into refined, predictable products. Plus, there are organic phosphorus sources closely associated with livestock operations or with the proximity to major metropolitan areas. This is human waste issues. There should be no difference in P fertilizer sources as long as nutrient announcement differences are taken into account. While there are certain situations where one product performs better, phosphorus fertilizer recommendations are the same regardless of the phosphate fertilizer source. So already you've heard that same story with regard to the chemistry of nitrogen and how nitrogen is utilized by a plant. It's the same story here with phosphate. So regardless of the system of agriculture that you use, whether it's a chemical system are biodynamic, regenerative organic, permaculture system, regardless of what the label that's used to describe the system of agriculture that you're following, the actual way that a plant utilizes phosphate sources is always the same. It will only utilize in its metabolic pathways P2O5. Rock phosphate is the original raw material. Yeah, go ahead.
Because I hear this the second time that like if it's nitrate or it is phosphorus, it doesn't really matter if it's come from a natural biological thing or from whatever other source. So that would mean that you can fertilize like everybody's doing nowadays, or organically, it would not really matter. Is that?
Not exactly. So what he's hearing, he heard it from nitrogen, he's hearing it now, is that there's only very specific forms of these nutrients that a plant can uptake. So
yes,
with that in mind, it doesn't really matter what kind of fertilizer you use, whether it's organically certified or chemical or whatever. You could do whatever you want. It's all the same.
from the chemistry of the plant, what the plant brings across its membrane, that is accurate. However, your question is not about the chemistry of the plant. Your question is about the systems of agriculture. And there are big differences with respect to the systems of agriculture. For example, in the case of utilizing anhydrous ammonia as your source of nitrogen, when farmers use anhydrous ammonia, it is applied as a gas, and there are a lot of negative side effects to the use of anhydrous ammonia. Let me give you a couple of examples of that. This would be anhydrous ammonia is a raw material that's utilized under the label of conventional agriculture, which is a system of agriculture. The general description of it by label is conventional agriculture because it's commonly practiced today in all parts of the world. But in the case of areas of the world where the way that they deliver nitrogen to a field under conventional agricultural systems, they utilize anhydrous ammonia. That particular raw material in conventional agriculture as a source of nitrogen has a lot of negative side effects in the soil environment. The origins of anhydrous ammonia as something that you can apply to soils was created during World War II by military chemists as a way to turn soils into tarmacs for landing airplanes on islands in the South Pacific Ocean. So they would go in and they would inject anhydrous ammonia, which is a gas. If you inject large amounts of anhydrous ammonia into your soil, it actually changes your soil into something that resembles concrete. So that's it. That's the extreme end of what it's like to use anhydrous ammonia. You can imagine, as a military application, they perceived value in that because they could create a runway in a very short period of time without using concrete. So it would make the soil really, really hard. In agriculture, using anhydrous ammonia on your field destroys the biology of your field. It's antimicrobial. It kills microbiological life. It's also highly destructive to the structure of your life, of your soil, and decreases. I'm going to tell you what it is from a very technical point of view. It reduces crumb structures in your soil so that the fraction of the aggregates in your soil, and there are many forms of aggregates. The best form of an aggregate is a crumb structure. That's the label for it. It means an aggregate that's very porous. It means that being a porous aggregate, it holds water, it holds nutrient material very well. A soil that's been destroyed, one of the ways that you would describe that soil is the fraction of the aggregates that is represented in the form of crumbs, crumb structures. The concentration of crumb structure in the soil structure has decreased. That often produces compaction. You could actually expand that to actually create a runway for an airplane. But what it does in the field is it delivers nitrogen really cheap, but you destroy other aspects of your field at the same time. By contrast, if you use chicken manure to add nitrogen to your field, you do not get the same negative side effects as adding anhydrous ammonia in conventional systems. So if you use composted chicken manure versus using anhydrous ammonia, ultimately the chicken manure has to break down and slowly release ammonia into the soil solution, which the plant can use directly, or it could be converted to nitrite and then to nitrate, and the plant can utilize nitrate directly into its metabolic pathways. Okay? The plant's going to use the same two forms of nitrogen, nitrates or ammonia. In conventional agriculture, it gets those two forms from anhydrous ammonia. But when you deliver anhydrous ammonia to your field, you destroy the soil as a natural resource for future generations. When you use chicken manure as your source of nitrogen, ideally, if it's done properly, it's more regenerative by nature because you are delivering a product that releases the nitrogen more slowly. It's more easy for the soil to accommodate that quantity of nitrogen, water-soluble forms of nitrogen. And there are also a lot of additional organic chemistries that are delivered to the field along with the nitrogen that are a benefit to the structural integrity of that field. So it's a question, really, you could think of it very simply, which system and the raw material that you use within that system. When you utilize that raw material, which one produces negative side effects and which one does not?
Yeah.
Does this answer the question?
Yeah, that was a wonderful answer, Jim. So we had one question come up in the middle of that. Does anhydrous ammonia occur in the natural environment anywhere?
Sure. Sure, it does. It is a chemical molecule. It does occur, but it's not concentrated as a fertilizer source in nature. In conventional synthetic agriculture, hydrocarbons are utilized to produce anhydrous ammonia. Hydrocarbons, the most prevalent form of those hydrocarbons would be oil reserves or natural gas.
try to sell it to you. So
Yeah, so when we say that conventional ag is based on oil and gas and coal, I mean everything, not just the gasoline, but like
it's like how they do the
everything.
pig, you know, they try to sell every piece of the pig first.
Yeah.
Use and
All right. Any,
Conventional,
Jim?
yeah, conventional agriculture is very much hydrocarbon-based system of agriculture. But just to be fair, hydrocarbons were originally plants.
Yeah, millions of years ago, they were plants.
Million.
Source.
That's right. That's right. But when you recycle them into a form that we use today, first we pull them as hydrocarbons, which they are naturally occurring hydrocarbons in the earth. Then we pull that material and convert it to something that has a high concentration of plant available nitrogen in it. In this case, we're talking about nitrogen. Then, it works, it delivers nitrogen, but just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should do it. Have you ever heard that before?
Yeah. All right. We are closing in on 9 p.m. and
Yeah.
I'm sure you're pretty tired too. Do you want to find
Okay.
a natural stopping point somewhere here?
Yes. Okay. So rock phosphate is the raw material, and most commercial phosphate fertilizer manufacturing begins by producing phosphoric acid, which is then used to treat phosphate rock. And what's really negative about phosphate chemical treated fertilizers is this molecule over here called phosphoric acid. Residues of phosphoric acid go into your soil when you use phosphate sources that have been treated, processed, chemically treated with phosphoric acid. The residues of that phosphoric acid end up in your soil. And that can be a big negative because phosphoric acid will kill the biology of your soil. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We can easily move, on the third day, we can easily move through the rest of the phosphate and the potassium because there's less information compared to the nitrogen story.
Are there any further topics after that you want to cover, Jim?
I would like to, if we have time in the third session, at the end of it, go over the concept of minimum risk pesticides and how that law is evolving in the country or in many different countries, and specifically provide for them the list that is there are pre-approved lists of raw materials, a lot of them food type materials that are built into these laws. And the PowerPoint that I have will go through the list of materials. A lot of those kind of materials are going to be available to them locally. They are, in many cases, food items, and they can be utilized as pesticides. Or the Organic Materials Review Institute, OMRI, which I'm sure you'll get a chance to explain to them what that is at some point, Chris. But OMRI utilizes that list as at least a starting point in deciding what raw materials can be used in organic agriculture. And I have a PowerPoint that summarizes and explains the value of this list from the legal point of view in the world of agriculture. So that PowerPoint, we can probably cover it. We can probably cover it in about 30 minutes, and we'll tack that on at the end. Maybe we can get all that done in our next session, which I guess will be on Monday night for you, right?
That's correct.
All right. So you might let Steve know that we're going to use that Monday night, and then we'll be finished then, Chris.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll send an email to the group and let everybody know the change.
Okay. All
Great.
right.
All
Is it
right.
going okay? Is it going okay so far for everybody?
Yes.
Yeah. People are learning a lot. So
Okay.
it's
a lot to absorb.
yeah. Your lectures are good. A lot of good information. It's dense, but they're liking it. So
Okay. Very good.
Is he in India?
you're in India right now, is that right, Jim?
Yes, I'm in India and the sun is coming up here.
Yeah. All right, Jim. Well, sleep well.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.